everybody, and welcome to another episode of Connect Conversations. Today's conversation is all about dealing with poor performers. It's brought to you as a part of Mobius Connect's ongoing YouTube series, Connect Conversations. I'm Kim Fugger, the manager of Mobius Connect, and I will be your moderator for today's session. First, I'd like to take a moment to introduce the host of Connect Conversations series, Global Reliability Improvement Experts, Doug Plucknette and Ron Moore. Hi, guys. Are you there with me?
We're here.
Hello there.
Okay, well, before I pass the microphone over to you guys, I want to encourage our audience today to submit any questions that you have during our time. You guys are welcome to submit the questions directly to me, Kim Fugger, or you're welcome to just hit chat to the whole group. And Ron and Doug will be here to answer your questions live and on the air. Your questions will be answered anonymously, so no need to worry about getting called out directly. Doug and Ron are here to provide their advice and perspectives from their experiences and are here to help you. All right, Doug and Ron, I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to you now.
Okay. Well, Doug, you want to start? Do you want me to start?
Why should we break tradition, Ron? I think that you're really good at starting out. How's that?
Oh, okay. Well, I'll start then. Well, to everybody that's out there listening, thank you for coming. Today we're going to talk about, managing difficult employees. I started to say bad, but that might not be an appropriate word. They're not bad. They may be misplaced. They may be lack motivation. And part of that could be because the company's not doing a particularly good job in putting them in the right slots or providing them with the right, motivational experience and so on. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that. I'll just start with a couple of comments. One of my fundamental philosophies is there's no such thing as a bad employee. Now, having said that, there may be, one or two who need to be employed somewhere else. But before you make that decision, why don't we go through a process that tries to make an evaluation of that? So that's one comment. The second comment is this. There's, some folks that I've worked with in the past, Bob Kelleher in particular, he says that, if you look at 100 employees, he says something on the order of 30 of them will be what he calls engaged, highly motivated. You rarely have to speak to them and so on and so forth. They're really and truly look forward to coming to work. Then you'll have about 50 of them that, they show up and they do their job. They're kind of disengaged, but they will do, what's required or what's expected. And then there's another 15 or 20 that are actively disengaged. And those are the ones you need to, worry some about. Now, the different studies have different numbers. I think Doug has a study that says it's 10, 60, no, 10, 80, and 10. Yeah. And then I saw another one is 20, 60, 20. The point is, you've got a spectrum of people from highly motivated to, not just not motivated, but actively trying to sink your boat, if you will. And sometimes those guys who are actively disengaged can be the most engaged ones if you sort through that and you provide them with a reason for being engaged, and you actively solicit their opinion, and and in effect, put them to work doing something they enjoy. So that'd be my initial comment. Doug, you want to, put in there?
Regardless of the numbers, as you said, I'm person that always talk about 10, 80, 10, with 10 being top performers. They're highly motivated. In fact, self-motivated. You don't really have to deal with them much at all. They'll come to work and get started right on their own and do things, look for projects, do more than what's expected. 80% are the middle They require some leadership and some direction. And then that bottom 10, as you say, is the ones you got to keep an eye on. But what's important to know and understand is why is that person, or why are those people in that bottom 10? What's going on that they're not performing well, or they're having a difficult time at work, right? So is it a personnel related issue where they're working with somebody or crew that they don't get along with? Is it a home related issue that might be finances, or a bad relationship, or the child that's having problems? And those are things where it comes into leadership, where, I mean, you have to have a relationship with your employees. And when you and that's where it gets tough, especially in the operations side of the business, where it's not uncommon for a supervisor to have 40, 50 employees. It's tough to get to know all those people when you have a lot like that. But that is what your job is, to understand what's going on in that person's mind. Because your job as a leader is to either change that, right? That behavior, what's going on, and make it go away, or motivate that person to do more so that they get out of that bottom 10, right? Or deal with it, right? And your failure to deal with that as a leader impacts that middle 80 and even that top 10, because they get frustrated by seeing some employees get away with, oh, they do less, or they're trouble in the workplace. They create troubles every shift, trouble every night. And again, it's your job as a leader to deal with that, find out what those issues are, spend some time with that person, and see if it's something that can't be corrected.
Yeah. And I think we're going to come back to that, to maybe a little bit more particulars on, having a discussion with those folks and so on. But I want to go back some real basic stuff, I guess question number one would be, have we set standards and expectations for our employees, and are they aware? It's like a job description with some particulars on, what you expect of them. And are these both, behavioral, and are they, specific? And how do we measure that? Is it a subjective measure? Is it an objective measure? You got to, produce 3 reports per month, or you've got to, put out 100 widgets per day. And so some of it's going to be both. But if folks don't understand, what the standards and expectations are, and if they're frustrated, then they're more likely not to be a particularly good performer. And even before that, do we recruit and hire based on those standards and those expectations and so on? And do we inform folks what our expectations are? Now, that'll vary depending on whether you're hiring a shop floor guy versus a CEO. It'll vary a lot. But I think those kind of, at least in broad or general terms, ought to be articulated up front, early on. And then, after that, have we onboarded these folks with appropriate, whatever, indoctrination, training, development, and so on? So those are some things that a lot of folks, the hiring process is, we need a whatever, and you get them on board. You say, well, there you go. There's your job. Go to it. Okay.
So one of the interesting aspects of this is, you mentioned, gee, when you hire the CEO, there might be a different set of standards in terms of what our expectations are. And that is certainly true. The other truth is, you're going to see that same distribution regardless of the job that somebody does, whether it's a school teacher, a CEO, a production operator, a doctor, doesn't matter. Right. There's going to be top performers, there's going to be middle performers, and there's going to be those ones that are struggling. Right.
Yep.
And we find that in our everyday life. I mean, I can tell you that Just in the past year, I switched to doctor because I was not happy with the performance and what my expectations were of my own doctor. Right. And when those things aren't met, it's up for you to make a decision, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So, side comment that, you know, I spent a lot of time studying this because my wife's had a liver transplant, but you know, doctors, my view, doctors are spot on about, 85% of the time, give or take
Yeah.
some, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, that means they're wrong, 10, 15, 20% of the time. So you just kind of have to be an advocate for yourself when you're getting medical treatment. So anyways, some other questions you might throw out there. How about supervisors? Are our supervisors adequately trained in supervising, and have they communicated effectively, the standards, the expectations, the measures, how their folks are being judged? And I guess, what's their style? Are they a coach? Do they interact well with folks, or are they an autocrat? Damn it, you will do it this way.
Right. And that goes back to the hiring piece of that. What is your criteria? And I could tell you, coming from the maintenance world, back when I first started out, I could tell you the company that I worked for was, boy, they want the hardest working guy. That's going to be a good supervisor, right? Well, sometimes those highly motivated folks have a very difficult time understanding how to lead the middle percentage, right? They don't understand that. What do you mean you don't know what to do? You first starting out in the morning, just go out and find something. Well, some people just aren't that way. All right. So you have to, provide that training and leadership to say, this is a different job for you. It's way different than being a lead person. Supervision is it's the next step up, but there's quite a bit more responsibility that goes with it. Quite a few more different rules to adhere to and abide to that you might not be aware of. And again, as you pointed out, what are that person's traits? Are they a leader by nature, right? Or are they somebody that has very high expectations of people, but doesn't know how to express that properly?
Yeah, and it's kind of complex, but in some cases it's kind of simple. One of the additional things I think you ought to go back to, if you haven't done this already, is, does your HR manual, your employee handbook, by whatever name you call it, does it have a process that's outlined for managing poor performance? Most companies do. We had one, and so you better follow it.
Yeah.
And usually that involves sitting down with the employee, doing an initial counseling on standards and expectations, letting them know where they're falling short, asking them if there's anything you can do to help improve their performance. And then you got to go, see if they improve. And then you have a second counseling session. Along about the third time, usually that's the end, and you go through a termination process. But if you don't go through the specifics of your, employee handbook, then you're setting yourself up, for a lawsuit and a bunch of grief. So that's just a reminder to some of you. You've got an outline process, and you probably, I suspect most of you have an HR manager that you should have some discussions with about managing a difficult employee. But I think it begins with sitting with the employee and finding out what's going on. What's going on? Here's the expectation. We got some difficulty here. Could you tell me a little bit about what's going on with you? Sometimes that might be a personal issue, wherein they really need some help outside of work to deal with that. they're not a bad employee, but they've got some things happening that need to be addressed external to what the company can do specifically to that problem.
But man, there's a million things when you open that door, right?
Yeah.
Financial issue, marriage issues, drugs, alcohol, children, ex-spouses, I mean,
Yeah.
neighbors. The conflicts are just endless, and it's one of those things you have to open that door. You have to know what's going on. You have to be honest, and you have to be strong when it comes to dealing with people that are having those issues, right? Honesty is a big thing. Compassion's a part of that too. It's saying, hey, look, I've been there. I understand what you're going on. Let me see, I can give you a little advice on this, and maybe I can help you out with that. Let me know how things are going. Keep me in the loop. Let me know when you're struggling. Those things mean a lot to people, to know that you care and show that compassion starting out. That the strong side of it is to say you can't be used either, right? Sometimes these things, there's just not much you can do, right?
Yeah.
And you have to communicate to the employee, here's what my limits are, right? And here's the expectations. I'm going to set these expectations on the behaviors I expect to see, and they have to change. If they don't change, this is what our path is going down the road. Right. I want to make that very clear to you. I'm willing to help, but there's a limit to what I can do. Right.
Yeah. Well, just one other comment. Some companies, I know we did when I was president of CSI, we had an external, I forget what it was called now, but it was a help program. Yeah. And we had a confidential toll-free line where you called in and you explained your problem, and the company had external resources that would bring you in for financial counseling or bring you in for, psychological counseling or, whatever the problem may be. But we tried to make that available for folks, to help them with those kinds of issues. And, I hope, that most of you have that. If you don't, you might want to consider, putting it in place. Sure. There's a point at, just for instance, there's a point at which you as a supervisor or as the manager of the supervisors, you may not be skilled or trained or qualified, or legally, you may not be able to step in and help those folks with those particular issues. But if you can have some external resource that helps with that, then I think that would be a good thing. That would behoove you to do that.
Yeah. By the way, confidentiality is a big piece of that as well. Right? When an employee comes to you with a problem, it's important for you to, not let that out of the bag by anybody else. I mean, that's one thing. You can break that trust with an employee, and that'll make the matter go 3 times worse at warp speed, so to speak. Yeah. So there's a lot to that job, and so that I just want to make sure I add that piece in, with be honest, be open, be strong, right? And be confidential.
Yeah.
Right.
One of they're kind of, in my mind at least, there are separate segments of problem employees. One is related to, they've got a issue on the home front, and we just kind of spelled out any number of things where that can happen. And that has to be handled separately or differently from those wherein, maybe you just got a guy that's not an issue for them, but they're just not performing. And part of that could be because, they're not happy. Well, then that's where you, as a supervisor or manager, need to get involved and find out why they're not happy. Mm-hmm. But couple of fundamental questions there is, how do we engage that employee more fully so that they're more satisfied with their work? And how do we engage them in things that don't just make them happier, but actually contribute to the success of the company. So I would be looking at both for those particular what types of employees. How do we engage them in doing things that make them happier and contribute to the success of the company? And some of those guys, I think, become your biggest advocates if you can accomplish that.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a pretty big if, but if you can accomplish engaging them and doing things they like and that are good for the company, that's a real, win-win and probably a triple win. You get bonus points for something like that. So Doug, go ahead.
Another tip that I give supervisors that are having some issues like this is I tell them, especially if it's work center related, right? I relate to one issue where a guy, he was the king of giving people nicknames. So he gave this one or two people nicknames that they didn't care for, right? And it affected their performance. And then their boss was like, how the heck do I manage this, right? Or I think some people are being thin-skinned. I think somebody else is maybe doing a little bit too much picking on people. And it's one of those things that sometimes you just bring them all in the room and say, here's what our expectations are. Number one, be nice to one another.
Yeah.
It's not that difficult, right? And if somebody tells you, hey, you're saying something I don't care for, number one, speak up for yourself. Number two, if somebody comes to you and says that, pay attention to that, right? Put yourself in that person's shoes. So try to deal with those issues first off in a work center type environment, to say, here's what our expectations are of each other, right? And if we all follow these rules, work is a happier place, right? So it's although the issues can always be tricky, and it does. It takes being engaged with your people to get the most of them.
Well, one of the expectations I think you should set at every level is that we will treat each other with respect.
Yeah.
And reinforce that. You can reinforce it two ways. When you see it happening, make a point of saying, I appreciate you doing that. But when it's not happening, make a point of saying, look, you guys need to show a little respect to each other. Or if I'm not doing it, you need to tell me and I'll try to correct myself. And likewise, I'll tell you. But even if it's kind of like any situation, even if you don't agree with people, you can show them, give them a little respect and show them, allow them the dignity of their position. So I would, I think that's way up there in the queue in terms of, managing, employee expectations. But if you can engage those folks, it's not a personal problem. You're going to handle that separately. But if you can engage those folks who aren't performing by getting them involved in projects or work that they enjoy that contribute to the company, that's your best avenue for that. And it begins with finding out what the issues are, doing the counseling thing, and following your standard HR manual or your employee handbook. So,
and then I think the next piece of that is, once you communicate that and you communicate what your expectations are and you see those behaviors changing, you have to acknowledge that, right? There has to be reinforcement behind it to say, hey, I see that's changed and now this is what I'd like to see. I appreciate that. I appreciate your effort, right? Communicate that you've recognized that change is occurring. That's just as important as setting the expectation, is the recognition that it has changed.
One other topic we hadn't touched on yet, and that's the annual performance appraisal.
My favorite.
Everybody hates those. I hated getting them. I hated giving them. It just it's a real worrisome, difficult thing to do. So maybe rather than doing that, maybe you should have what amounts to daily, weekly, periodic, aperiodic, performance appraisals, where if folks doing a good job, you praise them and tell them they're doing a good job, and then you set some expectations in your whatever your staff meetings or your monthly reviews or whatever it is, and or you counsel that didn't go so well. What do you think you should do differently next time? How can I help us achieve that? What do we need to do as a company? You want to try to make it interactive and collaborative and cooperative. Now, if you're the boss, most people know you're the boss. You don't have to remind them of that. So, try not to be, in my view, my style is try not to be an autocrat unless, it's appropriate, where you assert yourself, but that ought to be, few and far between.
I'm just going to tell everybody that works for a large company right now the truth.
What is that?
There it is.
Oh, yeah.
You all
got a
are
bell
on
curve.
that bell curve.
Yeah.
And your poor supervisor, there's nothing he can do about it. There's only so many raises he can give out, and he can't give them out to the same people every year, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
be patient with the fact of what reality is. I can tell you that was my nightmare as a supervisor, and I remember spending hours and hours and hours doing it, and then going back through them with my boss and him wanting them changed because of that person got 2 in the last 5 years, and this person over here, oh my goodness, right? Are we awarding our good performers or what? Please tell me the truth behind the whole scheme so you can make my life a little bit easier.
Yeah. What is the expectation? What is the standard?
Yeah.
And a lot of these standards aren't going to be explicit or specific, but if you can get some guidelines around, what you're supposed to do from your boss, I think you're going to be better off, So, what else we got, Doug? We've rattled off a bunch of things here.
Hang on just a minute. I've got somebody at my door, so it's up to you, Ron. Take over for a minute.
Okay. Well, do we have any questions? Who has a difficult employee out there? And I'll see if I can answer your question. And if I can't, maybe Doug can when he gets back. So we don't really have questions. Well, here we go. Let's see, this question says, can you give an example on how you approach someone on their poor performance at work? Yeah, sure. I can, and probably Doug can too. I've had, I forget what my role was now, director of projects, and I had a project engineer that wasn't performing particularly well. And it wasn't because they didn't have the project skills. They knew how to put together a Gantt chart and a critical path method, knew how to do the work breakdown, they knew specs, but they were really, they alienated everybody they were working with. And so people didn't like to work with them. They just said bad things about the interaction because they were a little bit officious and a little bit demeaning and all those things. So, I went and I talked with this employee and, advised them of what their coworkers were saying. And they listened, but then they didn't listen because they didn't accept that, that was the case. They they didn't see in themselves that they were alienating all their coworkers. And so we had a discussion about that, and I gave it some time. And then I had a second discussion with this employee, and they still didn't see it. And in fact, if anything, the situation got worse. So in that case, I terminated the individual. And that was really a difficult thing to do, because you hope that when you counsel folks, and maybe I wasn't as good a counselor as I should have been at the time, but ultimately I had to, fire that person. But you got to go through a process of, advising the folks what your expectations are, what the problem is, asking them to make corrections, asking them if you can help in that regard. But if their mind is set that they're not doing anything wrong, and the rest of the world is wrong, then, well, maybe they're not suited for your organization. Doug, do you have one? And I'll try to think of another one.
I had one, and this was a strange one. It was a person that was I would call borderline high performer, self-motivated, that began to struggle. And it was the type of thing, when I first brought him in the office, there was a little bit of tension on, my life's not going good, mind your own business, more or less was the first talk. And then the second one was, okay, I'm doing this because something's changed in your life. It's impacting your work. I can't ignore that. The folks that you work with are complaining about it. All right. So now it's become an issue with them as well. I need to know what's going on in your life. And this was one that a marriage was going bad, and the person was being asked to leave the home, and they had children, and anything like that that's going on in somebody's life is going to impact their entire life, right? Not just the home life. It impacts work. It's just natural, right? And it was the type of thing that, look, what can I do to make your work like a little bit easier, so that we can get by what you're going through, And this person asked to switch shifts. I need to be around more, because that's one of the issues with the split, was where the kids going, and it's at the point where I'm not hardly seeing them at all, right? And so we worked a different schedule, and the performance improved, and then the next year we made another schedule switch, and then life seemed to get a little bit better for that person, and we worked it out.
Yeah.
But it's recognizing that there's a problem, and saying, hey, look, I see this going on. This is what the expectations are. That compassion side of it, what can I do to help, right? Because if you work with people, like I said, and I don't think I've said this yet today, I'm a person that believes, I don't believe anybody comes to work to do a bad job, right? Their intent when they get hired is, they want a job and they want to be a good performer. And things in life change, whether it's work related or home related, and being a leader, part of that is addressing and dealing with those issues.
Yeah.
Right. And if you do with it, and down the road, that person specifically came and thanked me on more than one occasion for having that compassion, for saying, hey, thanks for taking the time to care and being interested and working with me.
Yeah.
Right. Made a difference.
Yeah. And I've got a couple other examples. They're very similar. I had a couple of folks working for me, and this was at different times. And in both cases, they were in a role that we thought they would be well suited for, But after they got into that role, it turned out, well, maybe not so much. They weren't certainly, in one case, they were not meeting my expectations. And, we had a chat and I advised them my expectations. And to make a long story short, both guys got moved to different roles, different jobs in the country. In one case, one guy was a manager, and his people were not happy at all with him, not because he was a bad guy. He was a good engineer and a good, decent fella and got along well with everybody, but he just wasn't suited for a supervisory position. So we put him into the role of a product manager, and he did really well at that. He didn't have a staff to worry about and, manage all those personalities and deal with all the things that go with being a manager of people. And he did a really bang up job in that role. And the other guy, we just moved him from one role to another. He was still supervising. He just was better at the new role than he was the old role. And they were both, quite successful in those new roles. So one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, are they in the right job? Or in Doug's case, are they on the right shift for that matter?
Yeah.
But it all this stuff begins with, some level of communications. And I think most of the time it'll work out well for you. But on occasion, they don't see it. You're still not happy. You've gone through the process in your HR manual, and eventually you have to say, look, this isn't working. We're going to give you severance pay. We're not going to demean you if somebody calls for reference, and we wish you well. And again, you got to treat folks with respect, no matter how it ends up. I think that's really, really important. Doug, do you have any others?
Only, from my own perspective, Ron, I could tell you that when I became a supervisor, it was a job I just realized, I thought it was one I thought I wanted for a long time. And then when I got in it and realized it wasn't what I thought it was.
It's mostly dealing with people. It's not working anymore.
That's when it was time to go back to school. And I love dealing with people, right? It was more the directive from above that we were a struggling company that was downsizing, and those directives sometimes made no sense at all. And it's tough when you got to sit there in front of your group and say, this is what we're going to do now, when your mind is going, and I know it's just as stupid as you think it is. Right?
Yeah.
But you can't say that, right?
Yeah.
So
you can. You probably wouldn't last long if you did.
Exactly. So I was thankful that the night school was working out well for me at the time, and it was just only a matter of finding the right opportunity. So
all right. Go ahead, Doug. Sorry.
It's the other thing that I tell people, anytime that you're not happy with your work, and I have sons and son-in-laws and nieces and nephews, and I've told them, man, don't forget that education piece of it. And I don't care what you went for school for. Once you get that piece of paper, it opens a lot of doors for you. Right. Yep. If you haven't got it, just work at it. And, whether it's one or two courses at a time, it'll change your life. School's not meant for everybody, but at the same time, that little piece of paper can open a lot of doors. And find something that you're interested in and peck away at it.
Well, I think the biggest thing in all of this is to communicate with respect.
Absolutely.
And if you can do that, you're more likely to resolve some of these issues. And if after trying whatever 2 or 3 times, it still doesn't work out, then you got a different kind of decision to make. But even that decision has to be done leaving people with their dignity and with a certain amount of respect.
Sure.
And if you do that, I think things are going to work out better for you, as difficult as they may be at times.
And
But
because
go ahead.
really the objective of this is to advise people how to deal with those poor performers. When you get to that point, it's also a good idea to have somebody that you can bounce your thoughts off of. All right, here's where I'm at with this employee, whether it's your boss or a peer that's at the same level. Here's where I'm at with this employee. Here's what I'm doing. Is there anything you'd change? What other options might I have here? All right. Make sure you open those doors as well. All right. Because it is the last thing you want to do. And you and I talked about this before we went live, is it's an awful thing to let people go. It's awful to lay them off and escort people out the door. You'll lose sleep that night before, and maybe more than one night, and you lose the sleep the night of that it happens, because you relive it and thinking about, did I do the right thing? What's going on with that person? Man, I hope it doesn't mess their life up too bad. But sometimes it's just a job that you have to do.
Yeah.
All right, you have to be strong.
All right.
So open those doors, talk to other people that you respect their opinions and advice, and say, here's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Well, communicate with respect. I'll say it one more time. Surely it's stuck by now, So do we have any other questions? And while we're waiting to see if there are any others, I just want to recap some of the things that, at least that I've said, because I've got some notes here. I always keep notes and a checklist of sorts. But let's go back when we recruit. Do we make clear the standards, the expectations? When we onboard people, do we make clear, what, or do we onboard them such that those standards and those expectations can be met? How do we measure both the subjective and objective measures? Do we have a process to routinely communicate with our folks, not just the annual performance appraisal? If you don't give folks feedback, along the way, and then you hit them with something that in the annual review, then that's not fair to them in particular. And it's not fair really to you, because you're going to get a lot of pushback and flaring of in those employees. So how do we measure performance? I think a big one is, how do we engage our employees in things that they enjoy, problems that they can solve that are making their work life more difficult, and that simultaneously will help us improve our company's performance. So, that engagement process with the employees, I think is way up there at the top of the list,
Probably number one.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. I can tell you that the places and times that where I've had jobs that I can say I thoroughly enjoyed. I enjoy my job now, but it's not a workplace, right?
Yeah.
There was one particular area that I worked in at Kodak that, man, if I could go back 40 years and relive that and stay with that group of guys, we just still today have lunches together and communicate on a regular basis, and a bunch of highly motivated people. And it was just a workplace that we challenged one another continuously to improve what was going on there. Right.
Yeah.
And it seemed like month after month, broke production records, lowered costs, lowered emergency demand work, improved reliability, and all those things we celebrated. Right. So they were recognized, and that's a big thing. Set those expectations, challenge people to go out there and do more. When they show those improvements, celebrate those things and make them known, and create an environment that people, they're bouncing ideas off one another on a regular basis. And you walk in and as I said, I've twice had areas like this that you walk in at break time, and man, those guys, rather than talking about who's in the lead in the AFC East, they're talking about what's going on up here and what can we do to make that better, right? They're talking about challenging one another to make work a better place, right?
Yeah.
When you get that environment, it's super powerful, right? And leadership has a lot to do with that. And like you said, treat people with respect, be honest with them, challenge them is another thing, right? Challenge them to improve things, right? And if they're struggling with that, then it's go back to the drawing board and give them more training, train them in root cause analysis, train them in problem solving methods, train them in precision alignment and balancing and anything else that you might be having issues with. Sending people to those things, and not only sending them, but then having the expectation that once you've done that, come back and show me what you learned, right? Come back and show the rest of the folks the right way to do things,
Yeah.
right?
One last repeat is question really for everybody out there. Are your supervisors trained in supervising and managing performance? Because if they're not, they're going to learn OJT, and that may or may not work out for them and for your people.
That's the worst way for a supervisor. I can tell you that without a doubt.
Well, that's how I learned. And
yeah.
and I got a lot of scars to demonstrate that I learned
it's a struggle, isn't it? It's a struggle.
You try one thing or another, and eventually you figure it out, but not before you've made your fair share of mistakes. So
I can tell you all the companies that I've worked with in the consulting world, there have been 2 that had formal supervisory training programs. Right. Yeah. So think of how many that don't. Right. Yeah. And those are the ones that, when I get there and we start working, you can see they're struggling. Suggestions on making employees feel empowered to make changes in the workplace and the process, etc.
Okay, I'll go first on that one because that's one of my favorite ones. Is go talk to folks. You've got your data as a manager or a supervisor. They have their day-to-day experience. Go talk to these guys about what's going on and what is creating the problems that you see that maybe coincides with what they're seeing, but you haven't had a discussion with them. And it may lead you down a totally different trail in terms of what you thought the problem was versus what they think. If you want to understand the problems with the work, talk to the workers. Now, once you agree and you identify something, then as appropriate, either give them the tools to resolve the problem or put together a cross-functional team to address the problem. Maybe it's a procedure, maybe it's a company policy, maybe it's, a machine, who knows what it might be, but you got to talk to the guys doing the work to figure out what's wrong with the work processes and then get them involved in creating the solution. And if they come up with a solution, then they own it. It's theirs. They've had control, they've had input, they have ownership and so on. So yeah, that's way up there in the queue. Doug, do you have a comment on that?
I'm a person that always says to me, don't come to me with emotion, come to me with data. All right. Come to me with pros and cons and good arguments, and then I can help you. Right. When you come to me with just emotion, like I don't like this schedule. I have another one that the guys that worked for me wanted to go to 410s, and my boss was dead set against it. Right. And they kept, for lack of a better word, I'll say crying about this. And I finally said to them, you all need to sit down and come up with the pros and cons of why this is the right thing to do, right? It has to make business sense. If it makes business sense, then there probably is no denying that it's the right thing to do. And when they sat down and they said, Number one is the cost savings. Here's how much money you paid. And they came to me, they said, can you show us how much we paid in Saturday overtime in the last year? And I said, yes, I can. All right. And they said, this schedule will work. One group of us will work Monday to Thursday, the other will work Tuesday to Saturday. And so there'll be no more Saturday overtime. All right. How does the boss turn around and say no to that? Right. They're saving them money and giving them more time at work.
Yep.
Once he saw that, he went, okay, I'm willing to try it. And then once it got started and he saw that it actually worked, it was, we don't need to go back to that, 5 8-hour day anymore. All right. So encourage people, again, use data, and if you're going to have an argument, what are the pros and cons and what are the business reasons for doing it? All right. When it comes to change in production, data is the biggest thing. All right. What am I going to do to this machine? Tell me how it's going to make a difference. How are we going to put more out the door for less money and have less failures? Show me the data.
Well, and I agree with Doug. You really want a business case, but let me give you a caution on that. Sometimes it's just a little niggly problem that aggravates the hell out of your people.
Sure.
And it won't add money to the bottom line, but it'll make them happier. So
that makes a big difference too.
So do those.
Yeah.
If you do those, you're going to build credibility with them that you care not just about the money, but you care about them and their work life. And if you do that, then they'll do more to help you make money because you showed that you care about them personally and the things that are aggravating them. So I think it ought to be, kind of a blend of those things. Most folks know that the company has to make money.
Yeah.
Okay. They know that. But there are times when making money isn't on the forefront of their mind because, I don't know, because maybe a particular process is giving them a backache every day and they go home and they don't feel good. Or, I don't know. Just, again, you got to go talk to them and find out what the issues are and then put together, a plan or a solution or engage them and give them the tools to solve some of these problems as best you can. And if you can't do that, you got to tell them, I'm sorry.
A great example of that one too. And that was, I happen to have a group of operators that they were all around the same age. It just so happened there was, I don't know, probably out of the 8 that I had, 6 had children in high school playing sports. And anybody that has a kid in sports, they hate missing those games. Yeah. And so they came to me and said, hey, can we, fill in for one another when Ron's kids got a ball game, I'll come in for work for him and cover for him until he gets back. Right. And I can tell you, HR was not interested in that at all.
Really?
Right? But guess what? We did it. And it made a group of people very happy. Right. So.
All right. Any other questions out there? I don't know. Have we answered these two guys' questions? We kind of blathered on there for a while, just relating personal experiences.
And the clock has run on us again, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, if you have questions, you can send them through Kim and we'll get you an answer back. And I hope it's been
I see one
helpful.
thumbs up there. So we answered somebody's question. That's
okay.
Good.
Well, good. Good. All right. By the way, this is what I call the soft stuff, which is the hard stuff.
Exactly. And I think it's the more important stuff too. It's leadership is a big deal. Having satisfied employees is even bigger.
Yeah.
Right. you got a workforce that's happy about coming to work every day, you're going to do a lot of good things will be going on. I guarantee you that.
Yep. And it all begins with, communicating and respecting and appreciating those kinds of things and doing it on a regular basis, not just once a year. All right. Well, I reckon we've, wasted another hour of your time today. Hopefully not wasted, but, hopefully you've taken away something from this. And we appreciate you guys being here. And we'll see, hopefully, some of you in the coming weeks. I think next time we talk about RCM, that's your area of expertise, Doug.
Just a little bit, I think.
Okay, I'm gonna observe, and you're gonna articulate the best practice associated with RCM. But I'll give you observations as an outsider who's just looking in. So, all right, guys, thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Yes, thank you both for another great conversation. And just to add to that, Doug Plucknette does lead up our Leadership Connection interviews. So you guys can find those on any of your favorite podcast stations. We have Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, but Doug does a great job interviewing industry leaders. It's a great one to check out. Again, that's the Leadership Connection. And before we end things today, you guys, I just want to thank our awesome audience for joining us. Thank you for all of the questions. As a quick reminder, you can see past episodes of Connect Conversations on YouTube, and we will share the link to subscribe to our YouTube channel in an email following this webinar. Be on the lookout. Again, in 2 weeks, just as Ron and Doug said, we will be talking about tools, the RCM. So be on the lookout for a registration link on that. And if you're interested in engaging with other industry professionals or would like to participate in the industry's live feed and forums on Mobius Connect, you can visit mobiusconnect.com to create your free profile. And be sure to follow us on social media to stay up to date with the latest community happenings. If you have any questions at all, you can email our team at info@mobiusconnect.com. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great day. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.